and picked up a piece of ground. And then she realized it was a trap door. There was a bunker down there.
Not exactly how her attackers, Anissa Weir and Morgan Geyser, were hoping this would end. Listen.
Well, I seriously don't know how I'm going to be able to sleep tonight. Seriously guys, the people on this list have survived some pretty terrifying and awful things. As always, I'm your host for this one, Landon Dallasing, and welcome back to another most amazing top 10 video. If you guys enjoy what we do here, if you enjoy everything scary, everything urban legendy, make sure you guys hit the subscribe button. And urban legendies is definitely not a word. Okay, so people all over the world have endured some pretty terrifying things. From escaping a cannibalistic serial killer to mysterious disappearances, this list has it all. But first, I want to know, what is the scariest thing that has ever happened to you in your life? Let me know in the comment section below. And also, let us know what top 10 videos you guys would like to see next. So let's jump right into this one. This is the top 10 real life horror stories that will haunt you. Hitchhiking gone seriously wrong drives onto this list at number 10. One of the most common things that we've learned at a young age is to never get in a car with strangers. So I'm not sure how Uber really persuade us to get in cars with strangers, but I guess Uber isn't hitchhiking. You actually know who's driving you, sort of. But I know in certain countries hitchhiking can be completely safe, but in America it's definitely not one of those countries. I know places like in Cuba, I know hitchhiking is almost mandatory, and that's because the transit system there, it just doesn't exist. Well, I'm pretty sure it was in Cuba, but you have to actually pick someone up who's on the road, who's trying to get to work or go to school or something like that. So getting back to this, back on May 19th, 1977, Colleen Stan decided to hitchhike 400 miles from Oregon to California so that she could surprise her friend for her birthday. Colleen was way less than 100 miles away from her final destination when she was picked up by Cameron Hooker. He was a 23-year-old guy who was traveling with his wife and baby when he picked her up, but underneath that family man disguise was a very evil man. He forced Colleen to be his personal sex slave for 7 years. So this guy actually kidnapped her and used her as a personal sex slave for the next 7 years. During that time, she slept in a coffin-like wooden box underneath their waterbed for 23 hours a day and was repeatedly tortured and abused. Colleen wasn't freed until 1984 when the man's wife helped her escape. Cameron Hooker was sentenced to 104 years in prison, and thankfully he won't be out there to pick up any other victims. The girl next door takes us to number 9. Sylvia Likens was only 16 years old when she was abused, and she was murdered by her caregiver Gertrude Benezuski and some of her other neighborhood kids. Gertrude and these other kids, some as young as 10 years old, tortured Sylvia for fun. I mean, these kids sound like future serial killers. The kids would take turns beating her, hitting her against the wall, and choke her until she passes out. Gertrude even put out her cigarettes on her skin, and soon the others joined in too. The abuse gets even more intense, but I won't scar you guys with the details. Just know that these kids are literally so messed up, and I'm sure they're locked behind bars now. Ultimately, Sylvia died due to brain swelling, internal hemorrhaging of the brain, and shock. This is a really sad and depressing story, so let's move on. We have the real life Slender Man who stabs his way into number 8. Slender Man is a tall faceless man who lurks in the shadows. He preys on young children and has even convinced some of them to kill for him. Now that we're familiar with Slender Man, let me introduce you guys to a deranged 12-year-old. In 2014, Morgan had a sleepover, so she invited some of her friends from school. But that night, her plan didn't include eating birthday cake and blowing out candles. Morgan and her friend planned on honoring Slender Man by murdering their friends. The next morning, they took their unsuspected friend to the woods and stabbed the poor girl 19 times all over her body. They thought that they brutally murdered her, but thankfully she was discovered by a cyclist who immediately called 911. She had to have a lot of surgeries, but the doctors actually managed to save her life. The girls admitted that they had been planning the attacks for months, so the judge sentenced them to spend a minimum of 25 years in a mental hospital.
Who stabbed her first?
I think Anissa stabbed her first, and then I continued, and then she was like, Morgan, make sure she doesn't escape.
Stranger Things in the Walls breaks onto this list at number 7. Do you sometimes get that weird feeling like you're being watched or someone's watching behind you? Yeah, I get that feeling sometimes. What if I told you that someone could actually be living in your home? Okay, that's not the case for everybody, but for this family in particular, they got a lot more than they bargained for when they did some exploring in their home. A family just moved into their new home and everything seemed normal. However, they made a shocking discovery that will send chills down your spine. When the two young boys were playing around, they discovered a secret door behind a bookshelf in their parents' bedroom. They went down the secret staircase that led to a creepy crawl space, and inside they found evidence that someone was living inside of their walls. They found food wrappers, statues, a key, and some other creepy dolls. Oh, and the candy wrappers were actually from candy that the boys stashed in their rooms. So they've been stealing their stuff. And this creepy crawler has just been roaming the house as they sleep. I mean, yeah, after finding that out, good luck sleeping tonight. Hopefully they were able to catch them. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm about to check every wall inside of my place and make sure there's no secret crevices or secret rooms, behind them. Flesh-eating bacteria attacks us in at number 6.
Graduate student is now clinging to life in critical condition. By the time doctors realized what was happening, well, the flesh-decaying infection had already devoured her leg muscles.
Amy Copeland contracted a flesh-eating bacteria when she fell from a homemade zip line. Note to self, never go ziplining on a sketchy homemade course. She went to the hospital where doctors treated her leg with 22 staples and then sent her on her way. But 3 days later, she was rushed to an emergency room in pain. That's when the doctors noticed she had necrotizing fasciitis. Surgeons had to amputate her hands, part of her abdomen, one of her legs, and one foot as well. She was also placed on a ventilator because she had kidney failure and other organ damage. I mean, just imagine going on vacation and wanting to be adventurous, but you end up getting a flesh-eating disease. That might be the worst vacation ever. Mommy Dead and Dearest creeps onto this list at number 5. This is a story about a mother and daughter who appear to be living in a fairy tale life, but in reality they were living in a nightmare. I mean, go back in July of 2016, Gypsy Rose Blanchard was sentenced to 10 years in prison after pleading guilty to second-degree murder in the brutal slaying of her mother. But let me explain. All of her life, Gypsy's mother told her that she was seriously sick and that she won't live to see her 18th birthday. Her mother shaved Gypsy's hair to fake cancer. She made her get a painful feeding tube. She lied to her daughter about how old she was. Gypsy's teeth rotted out. She was forced to take harmful prescription drugs, and she was forced to use a wheelchair and pretended that she was paralyzed from the waist down. This is a serious form of child abuse.
Gypsy was in a wheelchair. She had leukemia, and she was having seizures, and she had to be tube fed.
And then gradually that story fell apart.
Things are not always as they appear. This is a tragic event surrounded by mystery and public deception.
People thought of us as the sweetest mother-daughter, best people in the world.
A horrible hiking accident climbs this list at number 4. This scary story is about Diet Love Pass, who had an incident which is probably one of the creepiest mysteries in Russian history. Back in 1959, 9 students went hiking in the wilderness and they never came out. A search party was sent to find them, but they weren't expecting to see this. They found their campsite, but the tents were cut open from the inside and all of their stuff were untouched. They followed the snowy footprints, and over the course of 2 months, they were able to find all of the bodies. Despite the very cold temperatures, all of the bodies have little clothing on. Some of the bodies had major internal injuries that would be similar to being hit by a car, and what makes things even weirder is that there was no external wounds. One of the bodies has brain damage but zero physical damage to their skull. One woman was missing her tongue, eye, and part of her lips, and some of her facial tissues as well. No one knows what happened on that mountain even to this day. This case is still unsolved. The underground bunker brings us to number 3. Elizabeth Schoaf was approached by a person claiming to be a police officer. She was 14 years old at the time the man handcuffed her and walked her into the woods. He held her captive in an underground bunker that he dug by hand and kept her there for 10 days.
And picked up a piece of ground. And then she realized it was a trap door. There was a bunker down there.
During that time, he abused her many times, but the young girl managed to come up with a plan. She tried to earn his trust and make him believe that she was okay with the situation. She actually convinced him to let her use his cell phone to play games on, but she was actually texting her parents and friends for help. The police were able to find her location and rescue her from this underground bunker.
Go down the ladder and get into the bunker. He had like a rifle and a belt that had guns and handcuffs, and I saw a taser in it. So I knew he was well equipped to do anything if I acted.
Digging into number 2, we have a woman who was buried alive. Is anyone else starting to panic? I think being buried alive would be one of the worst ways to die. But for Michelina, she knew she had to keep on fighting. Well, let's rewind for a sec and go back to the beginning of the story. Michelina was in a very unhealthy and unstable relationship with her fiance Marcin. One day, Marcin hired an accomplice and attacked his fiance with a stun gun. He tied up her limbs, put her in a cardboard box, and drove out into the wilderness where he wanted to bury the mother of his child alive. So he dug a shallow grave and put a 90-pound tree branch so that she would suffocate. Once she woke up, she could only think about her son and how she needed to survive so she could protect him. So she cut through the rope with her engagement ring. Well, I guess the ring was good for one thing. And then she clawed herself out of her grave. Even though she managed to escape from this horrifying experience, she is still haunted to this day with severe paranoia and insomnia. Escaping Jeffrey Dahmer takes us to number 1.
Wanted to have the person under my complete control to do with as I wanted.
Jeffrey Dahmer is one of the most terrifying and infamous serial killers of all time. He killed and dismembered 17 young men in the late 70s and early 90s. He converted his apartment in Milwaukee into his own personal torture chamber, where he would lure innocent victims and use them for medical experiments, necrophilia, and sometimes he would eat them. One day he invited Tracy Edwards over to drink beer and watch The Exorcist 3. But when Tracy Edwards arrived, he quickly discovered that Jeffrey Dahmer was nothing more than an evil and scary predator. Jeffrey Dahmer used a butcher knife to scare Tracy, and he even said that he was going to eat his heart. Tracy just kept trying to keep calm, and once he was able to distract the killer, he hit him with the blunt object and ran out to the streets. He was able to flag down a police car, which led them to the apartment where they found a ton of body parts, including 4 human heads in the fridge. I mean, what the heck? Well, there you guys have it. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I'll see you guys all in the next most amazing top 10 video.
Who stabbed her first?
I think Anissa stabbed her first, and then I continued, and then she was like, Morgan, make sure she doesn't escape.
And picked up a piece of ground. And then she realized it was a trap door. There was a bunker down there.